Hello, it's me, Beth Rigby from the Electoral Dysfunction podcast, and I wanted to let you know that we are going on tour. We're coming to London, Salford, Liverpool and Glasgow. Ruth Davidson will, of course, be there too.
We're going to have some very special guests, and we're also getting you involved, so come along, ask us any question you like. It is going to be a super fun evening.
For all the info, go to aegpresents.co.uk. We'll be podding in person. Come along. Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction. It's parliamentary recess, so we're back with a second question and answers episode to keep you going while MPs are on their holidays or at least away from Westminster. Now, Ruth is here. Ruth, how are you and how's your week been?
It's been good. It's been an exciting week because, as you know, we got a new puppy. So we've been doing lots of work with Fergus and trying to teach him how to walk on a lead and trying to teach him not to poo on the carpet. So that's been very exciting for us.
Have you been successful? Have you had to clean up a lot of indoor poo?
Let's just say semi-successful.
I've seen a photo. He gives amazing side-eye. He's the cutest thing. It's all I can do. If I was not on holiday, I would be in Scotland hanging out with Fergus. I might hang out with Ruth too, but mainly with Fergus.
You'd be very welcome, but you would need to bring a mop and bucket with you.
We also have, and I'm very happy about this, Harriet Harman is back, baby. In fact, do I call you Lady Harman now?
Not yet, you'll have to restrain yourself. But I'm not adjusting very well because I'm supposed to be like calming down and becoming more sort of gracious. But I'm very overexcited by quite a lot of things at the moment. I'm really struggling at the moment to, feel normalised.
I sometimes watch Keir Starmer now because, I saw him quite a bit at the end of term because he was doing a lot of press conferences. He was going around all the drinks parties. I sometimes think, wow, it must be a bit like you're starring in your own movie all of a sudden, How is it? How do you think it is for him, Harriet?
It reminds me of when Tony Blair was elected and he had a 95% approval rating with the public. And I was like, oh, Tony, this is brilliant, isn't it? And he says, downhill all the way from here, So I think he'll have his feet very firmly on the ground, which is very different from me. I'm still in the overexcited stage, but.
But we love doing these episodes because we want to get to hear from you too. So if you've something you want to tell us, a question you want to ask, you can voice note me on 07934 200 444 or send us an email at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. And we have got a whole batch of burning questions to get through today on everything from voting for 16-year-olds to why Labour has never had a female leader. So let's get into it. So look, the first question, it's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader? There is and always has been no shortage of talent among Labour's women MPs, yet the furthest any of them have got is deputy leader. Now, Harriet, that is you. You're the farthest anyone got. And Angie Rayner.
Well, I think it's sort of embarrassing and sort of shameful that we think we're the party of women and equality, whereas we've never had a woman leader. And, Ruth's party, the Conservatives, have managed 3. But I think, actually Jess Phillips has had the best explanation of this, which is that the Labour women are more uncomfortable in our own party because our analysis is the power structures are wrong, they're patriarchal, everything's got to change, and that makes you quite a sort of irritant to your colleagues and uncomfortable and subversive, and therefore it's more difficult for them to rally round a woman who is critiquing the whole system, whereas I think the Conservative women hitherto were more or less, we're going to beat the men on their own terms. We're not going to change the terms of the game. We're going to beat them on their own terms. Now, having said that, there are a lot of Tory women who are very much critiquing the system and want to change. But the other thing is about my generation is that my mum wasn't really able to work. She had to be cooking my dad's dinner. She wasn't able to drive, not because we live in Saudi Arabia, but because my dad felt that women had spatial awareness problems and were dangerous on the road, a commonly held view at that point. And my generation had so many battles to climb and we were so beleaguered I think that this generation now, Jess and Ruth's generation, they're much more feisty and determined, and they're less sort of battered down. So I think next time, which I hope will be a long time away, because I hope Keir Starmer will be ruling in perpetuity, but next time I think it's much more likely. But I mean, I've been saying next time for a long time, so it's a bit pitiful, really.
Do you think the next leader will have to be a woman?
I think so. But, the other thing is this is a question for men as well. And I keep saying to the men in the Labour Party, be ambitious, that's a good thing. Strive to be deputy. They all want to be leader. It's like they've got to just now strive to be deputy and support a woman leader. It takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
Yeah, it does take strong men to back women sometimes, I think. Ruth, what do you think about this? Why is it that the Conservative Party have had female leaders? You led in Scotland, and the Labour Party, despite having many, many more female MPs, there's never been a woman at the top.
I mean, I think there is something in what Harriet says. There is quite a streak in the Conservative Party of quite liking almost kind of black swan type people that will go out and show stuff and confound what other people think of us. There is an element to which, we quite like, almost in a sense, beating Labour at their own game. But it's also interesting what Harriet says about generations, because I always grew up thinking that things would just inevitably get better for women because we're making so many strides so often. And then stuff happens that makes you think, well, maybe we have to keep fighting and keep holding the ground that we've already gained. And the moment for me that was lovely was I was a female leader in the Scottish Parliament when Labour had a female leader in Joanne Lamont and the SNP had a female leader in Nicola Sturgeon. And our presiding officer, who's the equivalent of the Speaker of the House, was also a female in Tricia Marwick. So we had every FMQs, it was only female voices that were happening in this semicircular chamber. And the contrast with the adversarial chamber in Westminster of male voices all the time was actually quite marked. And now we've gone back to a place where all of the leaders in Scotland are all male.
That's interesting also, thinking about it as well. We had Jo Swinson leading the Liberal Democrats for a time. There was Liz Truss for a time, but yeah, all the main parties, apart from Carla Denyer in the Greens, who's the co-leader, it's all men, isn't it, at the top now?
I just wonder, and I don't know whether Ruth thinks this is because the Tories have been the traditional party of government and Labour have been the outsiders and have governed much less. I wonder whether or not, because there's a kind of comfortable expectation about government, there's a feeling that they're entitled to take a risk. You can take a risk with a gay woman in Scotland. You can take a risk with Margaret Thatcher. Whereas Labour is being conventional because it's worried about upsetting the apple cart.
We actually, I think, care about power more than Labour do. And if there's a chance that we can get power, then we will go for somebody that's more tenogenic, centrist, speaks over the head of the membership out to the country at large.
As we record this, by the way, we will have a Conservative leadership race will be up and running. Nominations will be in. There will be a few candidates and then it will play out in September. We will be talking about that ever so much. But let's go on to the next question. Now, this is a question from Stuart, and he wants to know a bit more about how the media cover politics. He says, will you have to approach coverage of this government differently to the last few? He says it already seems like this new batch of ministers are giving the media more questions at press conferences. Well, actually, that is a good question, Stuart. So on the first one, in terms of the approach, you don't approach governments differently. You go in with the same principle, which is that your job is to hold them to account and kind of stress test policies, keep leaders honest, scrutinise them. That's our job. It's to scrutinise government. The way you approach it won't differ. I do think, though, Stuart, that how we cover this government might be different in that I think for the past 3-4 I could even go back to the 2016 referendum, actually, and then what happened subsequently in the Conservative Party leadership, subsequent prime ministers, elections. We have been doing a lot of politics and not so much in policy terms. And what I mean by that is that it's particularly the last 3 or 4 years with the iterations of the Tory party crisis around Partygate and Johnson and the fall of Johnson, the rise of Truss and the fall of Truss, and then the rise of Sunak, who effectively was a lame duck prime minister as soon as he went in and could never really shift the dial. We've been doing internal Conservative Party politics. And I think what will change in terms of coverage, and I'm actually quite excited about this because I haven't been able to do this for quite a number of years. And it's sort of, my slight girly swat way. The thing I actually really love about being a political journalist is policy. We can actually start talking a bit more, I think, about policy. And I'm not saying that we haven't talked about policy. Rwanda, what you do about illegal immigration, that's been a big policy area. But it's just been overlaid with so much internal politics. And I think that that is how it's going to change. And then just quickly on more questions at press conferences, Labour have given more access, absolutely. In the run-up to the election, Keir Starmer, when you're the opposition, you don't get up every day and everyone pays attention to you. As a government, everyone pays attention to everything you do. Rishi Sunak calls a press conference, we're all there. All political editors go. So when you're the opposition, you have to fight for attention. So he's had to fight for 3 years to get the attention of the media. They continued that through the election, where we got lots of access, lots of interviews. And since they have been in government, I've been to a number of press conferences and he takes a lot of questions. I'm hoping that doesn't change. Sometimes the longer you're in power, it does begin to change. But let's ask Harriet. In the last Labour government, under Blair especially, he was famous for courting the media, wasn't he? Do you think this government will be the same?
Well, I hope they will, because I think you're completely right that there's been a focus on the kind of drama rather than the things that make a difference. And now there is discussion about planning and about energy and about even prisons. And so I like the fact that it's no drama starmer, because that's the whole business of government, really, not who should be jockeying for position and who's next to be chucked out and whether more letters have gone in for the Prime Minister to be got rid of. So I'm hoping it will stay like that. But I hope that it will be a proper relationship with the press, not kind of spin doctoring, kind of background briefings. But I think the thing is that the question in the press conference, when you can't get the answer right, that is two things. Firstly, you've got to sort the policy. And secondly, don't retreat. Because if you can't answer the questions from the press conference, that's a reason to keep doing press conferences, because it's like an early warning system. It's not working. It doesn't sound right when you say it.
It's good. I mean, that I've never thought of that. But in a way, if you're testing the case with the journalists and they're going to ask you the tough questions, that all we are conduits for the public. Ruth, I know that we've talked about it and how you did it as Scottish Conservative Party leader. And, you talked a lot about how there was a lot of access up in Scotland, that you were very accessible to journalists.
Yeah, to the point that literally you could not get from your office in Parliament to the parliamentary chamber without crossing something called the Garden Lobby, where all the cameras were set up. So even if you wanted to avoid the press, even for like half an hour or half a day, you couldn't do it. You had to run a gauntlet. And if there was a scandal happening or something, you literally had people, there'd be TV cameras up your left nostril as you're trying to get to go and do First Minister's questions and things. So the setup, the geography of the Westminster Parliament is kinder to leaders. Yes, because you can avoid it. You can just not speak to people.
It's different, yeah. Yeah, so we have Central Lobby, and I'm sure some of you have seen ours, and you've probably seen me interviewing politicians in Central Lobby. But if Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak don't want to come via Central Lobby, there's a whole way into the chamber, isn't there, Harriet, from behind the Speaker's chair and then out that way. Sometimes we have been known to loiter in the corridors, trying to catch sight of who's going in and out of a Prime Minister's office, but we would occasionally get moved on by the security guards.
But you're not allowed to take cameras there because you've got a very strong lobby system.
Yeah, you can't take cameras, you just have to loiter like a slightly dodgy person.
But there's going to be a restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster because it's got mice and all sorts of drain blockages and things. I think the point that Ruth makes about the fact that there's the geography of the building of Holyrood means that you can't be hiding away. That is such an important point. I hope they'll take that on board and institutionalise that. You often see in the States, don't you, senators and things walking into the chamber and they have to walk past the media. That's such an important point. I hadn't thought about that,
Yeah.
about in relation to central lobby.
I mean, my preference would always be I would stop and I would give the clip, or I would arrange to do a one-to-one with people, because the last thing you want is the picture of you having stuff shouted at you while you're walking with your head down, because then you look guilty.
I find that really fascinating, Ruth, because one thing that you notice, and this is what I'm interested to see with what happens with the new Prime Minister, is that access becomes very difficult in the sense that you can't get to them. You cannot get to the politicians or the cabinet, in that, yes, I can stand outside Downing Street and shout at them as they walk into cabinet, but I can't stop them. I can't doorstep them. And one of the things we used to do is you can go and stand outside the gate at Downing Street and then you can doorstep cabinet ministers, but often then they choose to drive in, even if it's a very short drive, or they'll go through the back entrance. So basically you can be in a scenario whereby if a number 10 team decides they do not want to give access to a prime minister, then it becomes very limited so we always get an interview at party conference. So that's one of the dates where you get 6, 7, 8 minutes with a prime minister, sometimes up to 10. But my plea to politicians would be, do more long form interviews. You can't really do an interview in 5, 6 minutes. It's more of a knockabout. So I would like, especially if we're going to be in a world where we're talking much more about policy, you want interviews that are more light than heat, and light takes time.
And I think the podcast initiative has really helped foster that, actually. People have got hungry now for a bit more depth.
Yes. Anyway, let's stop there for a minute and we'll be back with a question for Ruth about the roles peers will play in the Tory leadership election. We'll be back after this. Okay, let's get back into it. Now, also, I should say, Harriet Harman was given a peerage.
Woo!
We discussed this on the pod. Yeah. And do you know what? Do you know when they announced it, Harriet? You will know. Well, you would have known. Harriet would have known, but you can't tell anyone. Can you? Can't tell anyone.
Yeah, you get told in advance because they have to vet you to make sure that you're not a sort of, dodgy money launderer.
Harriet Harman, I can report, was not a dodgy money launderer. And then it was election night at about 9 p.m. and I'm there going, the exit polls come in. You've got to nail the moment of the exit poll as a political editor. It's like, if you don't do that, you literally, what is the purpose of you if on the big moment of the big night you kind of go, oh, it's the exit poll, and you completely dissemble, not an option. And then just before the exit poll, they drop the honours list, and there you were.
It was quite odd timing, that.
It was
wasn't
very
it?
odd timing.
But
there you were, and you are Lady Harman of
Peckham.
There you go.
But actually, really, I feel that, and I just feel I'm a turkey going in to vote for Christmas happily, because it's just, it just hasn't got any legitimacy, the fact that we scrutinise legislation, but we've been chosen by an individual, whatever our fabulous merits.
All right, I'm not just saying this because you're on the podcast. You have sort of earned the right to go into the House of Lords. You've been at it a bit. You do know about legislation. You have been a public servant for how many years, Harriet, before?
I know, but I'm not accountable to anybody. And I think, and also there's all the, what do they call them? Not heretics. The hereditary.
Hereditaries.
Yeah.
The heretics.
Yes.
You're going to have a slightly awkward introduction. You're like, hi, heretics. How you doing? Nice to be in your chamber.
I mean, that is mad that you're just born into a family and you sit in the House of Lords.
Labour, they've said they're going to
abolish that part.
To get rid
they're going to get rid of the
them,
hereditaries, and they're going to stop it at over 80.
80s, yeah.
So that you've got, which is very sort of Biden-esque issue.
Yeah.
People, if they don't know when to stop, someone's got to
stop them. And Keir Starmer's.
Can I just ask, are you a bit disappointed that that's watered down? Because there was a plan that had been previously mooted that there was going to be, the second chamber would be a chamber of the nations and regions. There is widespread support within the House of Lords for it to be a more democratic chamber. I believe it should be fully democratic, but gradations of that. There's just sort of discussion about what that should look like. So there's actually almost pushing at an open door. And I'm surprised that the offer from Labour was as timid as it was.
Well, I think the difficulty is everybody can see what is completely wrong with the situation, but it's more difficult to decide how to sort it out, because if you have it more democratically elected, even if it's like secondary legislations or by region, then can it challenge the House of Commons and undermine a democratically elected government? So that's the difficulty that always falls down.
Well, I think House of Lords reform is going to be obviously a subject, not least because Starmer does think it's too big. And it's weighted towards the Conservatives because obviously they've been in government for 14 years. So he might have more battles in the House of Lords, but he will have Harriet Harman there fighting the fight with the heretics.
I will. I will. That's a promise.
Now, look, I need to get back to the question. It's from Ian in Poole. Ruth, Ian wants to know this. With the Tories now having to choose a new leader, it made me think about the episode when Ruth said if Nigel Farage was brought into the party, it would be over her cold, dead corpse. So I'm wondering what influence, if any, do peers have in choosing a leader? And Ruth, there is more. Ian has a second question for you. And if there was a coalition between Conservatives and Reform, are peers able to cross the floor the same way as MPs can? Can they resign? And if so, what party would Ruth join? Ian, I like those questions. Over to you, Ruth. Baroness Davidson.
My understanding is that, yeah, absolutely, if you're in the House of Lords, in the same ways as you're in the Commons, you can give up the whip and you can either sit as a crossbencher, which is kind of like an independent, or you can move to a different party if the other party will have you, and you can cross the floor. And there's two sides. So there's the side spiritual, which is where the bishops sit and the government sits, and the side temporal, which is where the opposition sits. So the next time I'm in, I'm going to have swapped sides because the government has changed in the Commons. In terms of the party leadership election, we're one member, one vote, completely flat. So my influence or ability to shape the next leadership election is exactly the same as Jessie McGlumphy's, who's a rank and file member. So there is no difference in the weights of your votes, but endorsements quite often carry a bit of weight. So, for example, because I'm drippingly wet and very centrist, there will be a lot of people that don't actually want to be supported by me because it doesn't do them any good at all if they are worried that the membership might see them as a bit drippingly wet. And I would be a kind of almost a signifier for, one wing of the party. So you can use your power of influence, but you have no greater power than any other member that holds a membership card of the Tory party.
You did back Sajid Javid. I remember that's where we first met. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
On the 42nd floor or something, you and I.
Yeah, there was a vote in the House of Commons that went on and on and on. So he ended up being 2 hours late for his own launch party because he had to vote. And I was the only person that was backing him that wasn't an MP. So I ended up doing the rounds of the room just trying to keep people sweet. I would practically had a cocktail waiter's tray and was giving out drinks.
So we're all shut in, waiting for Sajid Javid to arrive, who's now 2 hours late. And there was an open bar. So basically, I didn't because I had to be on telly. So I have a rule. Obviously, don't drink when you're on telly. It's just not a good combination. But everyone was getting sort of slowly sozzled. By the time Sajid Javid arrived, we were uncontrollable.
The saddest one I ever thought was when Angela Eagle ran to be leader of the Labour Party. She had this big launch, she was on stage, she was doing it noteless, she was doing the kind of wandering about, kind of very Americanised. And then suddenly something happened in the room and everybody that was watching, all the journalists, all the activists started tapping each other and elbowing each other and having chats. And you could visibly see her deflate because she couldn't work out what it was. And she had to ask, was it that Boris Johnson withdrew from the Tory party race that happened at the same time? And everybody started leaving and she just pulled this eye roll that could probably be seen from Mount Olympus.
For all of you out there reminiscing about leadership launches, God, we've done a few. That was 2016. And Boris Johnson was about to stand and then Michael Gove withdrew his support and then Boris did this whole speech and then at the end he went, and I have decided, and everyone's waiting for him to say, to run for the leadership. And he says, to not run for the leadership. And Nadine Dorries was in the front row and started to cry. And I was just absolutely, that was absolutely batshit that day. Harriet, do you remember it though?
I absolutely do. I remember Angela Eagle, when it came to questions from the press after she'd done her brilliant presentation, and she said, and can I have a first question from the BBC? There was nobody from the BBC there. They, along with everybody else, had gone off to where it was. It was very sad.
Politics sometimes, timing. Goodness me, we've gone through some journeys in these recent political years.
But she's a minister now, so she's risen again.
Happy day, she's a minister now, you see. It's a political roller coaster out there. You're up, you're down, you're in, you're out. This is a question from Josh. He's 19 and he WhatsApped us to say this. Starmer has mentioned lowering the voting age to 16. Do you think this would have a big impact? I worry about this as most of us youngsters haven't a clue what we're doing on the best of days. While I agree we should have a say, there is simply not enough education being provided on the right to vote for younger people. Josh, I reckon if you've actually bothered to listen to this podcast and contacted us, I reckon you really know what's going on. So you are my young person hero. If only all 19-year-olds listen to this podcast. But honestly, I just love young people being engaged in politics because you are the future. I was the future once, but I'm 48 now. Can't say that. Harriet still is the future. She's the future of the House of Lords. So she is evidence. You just keep powering on, ladies and men and everyone. Anyway, now the vote 16 wasn't in the King's speech. Commons leader Lucy Powell said Labour wants to reduce the voting age. When I was sitting in the studio doing the King's speech, I was looking through it and I was like, where is it? Anyway, I texted someone in government and I said, what's going on? Why is it not in the King's speech? You made this promise in the election. What are you doing? And they said, we do intend to bring forward this as a bill in this Parliament, but this first King's speech is all about growth. And we've talked about that planning and workers' rights and green energy and all of these things that Starmer and his team want to do for growth. And they said it's just not the immediate priority, but it is coming. So Ruth, 16 and 17-year-olds already vote in Scotland. Do you think it's made a big difference?
So I've been on a bit of a journey with this because when the bill came through the Scottish Parliament, I voted against it, as did the rest of my party. And then the first opportunity for 16-year-olds to vote was the Scottish independence referendum because we kind of got to make up our own franchise for that. And they were so engaged and we ended up doing so many schools events because it was such a long campaign. It was like 18, 20 months. We ended up doing so many schools events and the questions that we were being asked were of such a high standard, probably higher than for most adults, I have to say, that I was completely converted on it. And we have votes at 16 for the Scottish parliamentary elections and for all local council elections in Scotland. And it's still 18 for general elections and when we had them, the European elections. And to be honest, in terms of the profile of how that changes the vote, I mean, it kind of doesn't really. But I do like the idea that if you're able to leave home and pay taxes and work full time and all the rest of it, I have fully changed my mind on it. I think the difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old is marginal at best. And like I say, particularly those who are engaged, and there are lots of engaged young people out there, and social media has done so much for particularly campaigning from young people, I have to say, would happily bring it in for general elections.
Okay. Well, we had Rylan Clark on the podcast. Hi, Rylan, if you're listening, that was nice. He messaged me the other day. He'd had a rig beer from when we did our leaders debate, they made a rig beer. I didn't know about these rig beers. It was my sort of lips and hair on it. It was actually quite fun. It was a bit weird, but I took one home for my dad. Angelo had one, and apparently Rylan was sent one, so he also had one. Anyway, I've completely digressed. We were talking about serious stuff of 16-year-olds being able to vote. What do you think, Harriet? Do you think Josh is right? Do you think some 16-year-olds aren't ready? Do you think the government need to improve education on voting? What's your view of it?
Well, I think the older generation after the Second World War, they had a sort of habit of duty. It was part of your citizenship. You voted. And actually the habit of voting has been starting to die out. And there's a real worry that younger people will just not be voting. Nothing to do with the politics or the politicians or anything. It's just been a sort of secular trend. And the idea is that you have citizenship education in schools, all about the process, and then they surge from school right into the ballot box or even do it online. And it's about ensuring there should be some engagement to get the voting habit. So that's the idea of it. And I think the government will, as you say, get round to doing it. But I just have come back from Estonia and I was talking to somebody there who they all vote online now. Everything's online in Estonia, like everything. And it took her 20 seconds to vote.
Yeah, so we need to make it easier for people to vote.
I mean, first off, let's make it easier for MPs to vote. Like, have some electronic voting in the Commons, will you? Because, like, that's so anachronistic that the lining up in a corridor is mental. This is my favourite story about voting lobbies, is when you change government, obviously, you go from saying yes to lots of things to no to lots of things, or other ways around. And David Blunkett kept finding that his guide dog Hillary took him into the wrong lobby, and he had to get people to help him take him out and put him back in with Labour, because the dog had been so used to going into one lobby that when the government changed, it didn't know that you had to go into the other one.
Because you changed
sides,
of course. Yeah.
Love that.
Oh.
So basically, you're both in favour of 16-year-olds. Just to say, Ruth's party, the Conservatives, historically less keen on this, not least because obviously younger people tend to vote for more progressive parties, don't they? So let's see. Labour say they're going to do it. Josh, that would mean that my son in this parliament would have the right to vote. So I need to train him up a bit more on politics. I've got loads more questions, but we're going to come back with another Ask the Questions episode. So that's all we've got time for. But if you've got something you want to ask us, send to my burner phone 07934 200 444 or email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. We love hearing from you. I love the questions, and we always try to answer as many of your questions as we can and throw in our own questions to each other too. Harriet, thank you so much for joining us. It is, as ever, a joy to see you. And
Thank
you're looking
you for having me.
resplendent in a gorgeous pink suit. She is the most stylish woman in the House of Lords, hands down.
I thought I was going to be draped in ermine.
Do you not get any ermine?
Only the day you go in, and then after that, it's whatever you want to
Once
wear.
you've got your ermine, send me a pic of it, because I'd like to see you in some ermine. I think it's going to look good on you. But we are off for now, so thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.